Let's jump to this story from the Daily Mail. I saw actually this tweet first from Jack Posobiec. Woke Disney sparks outrage with new kids cartoon that claims America was built on slavery as it pushes reparations and says Lincoln had no desire to liberate the enslaved. That last part's true. Lincoln had no desire to liberate the enslaved. That's a fact. Anybody who reads about the Civil War knows that even the Emancipation Proclamation only applied to states in rebellion from the United States, meaning there were several northern states that had slavery that were exempt from it. However, I think this is what we were just talking about is the desperate attempt to generate tribalism for money, mission-driven storytelling, because an entertainment product won't cut it anymore. And I think that's what this is more about. But this also results. I mean, look at this. This is what they're teaching your kids. The U.S. still has not atoned for slavery. And look how pissed off these characters are. Your kids are going to watch this, and they're going to see a bunch of angry young people saying the United States has not atoned for this, and they demand reparations, when in reality, the United States has, in my opinion, more than atoned in a lot of ways. And in ways that it's not politically correct to talk about, and that none of these people will have an honest conversation with you about, and they will teach your kids because two things are happening. One, the industries are dying. They need to find a way to make money. How are they going to do it? Okay, we're not going to get a general audience anymore. General audience is no longer a thing. With the decentralization of the internet and streaming platforms, you need directed audience. You need a core audience. Choose what your audience is. When I worked for Fusion, they said our target audience are young progressives, and that means we are going to side with them and tell the stories they want to hear. Outright saying, as a media company, we are here to say what they want to hear, deliver them a product. Not, we try and capture everybody and tell them the news. That was their mission. That's what this is. And so what I see here is the other thing is, it's the long game, man. Mm-hmm. You're gonna sit here and be like, well, it's one show, whatever. Those kids are gonna grow up. It's the only thing they're gonna hear because people are too scared to speak up. And then this is what they're getting from Disney. And parents, thinking in their minds Disney is like Bambi, are buying this for their kids, but instead their kids are being told that America sucks, has never atoned, and angry. It's what you're going to end up with is a group of young people who are extremely unhappy, hopeless, and pissed off.
Well, I think when you said long ball, another thing came to my mind, which is there's a lot of people, Americans, born and raised Americans in big, powerful positions all throughout our country that dream of the day where America is no longer a standalone, independent entity. They want to see one world money, one world military, one world medicine, one world everything. And you can't have one world anything as long as the United States is still standing on both feet and able to hold its own. So if you can disincentivize kids, brainwash them and grow them up into a young adult of military age that is not willing to fight for their country, they don't think their country is worth fighting for, guess what? They won't fight for their country, and they won't be too upset if somebody wants to come in here and take the place over or take it down. If you think about the World War II generation, I had the great benefit of being around grandparents. My granddaddy, multiple Purple Hearts in World War II. You're around those people. My grandmother's dragging metal in from the ditches around Texas to the schoolyard where they would melt it down and turn it into tanks and airplanes and bullets. That's what they had to do to save not only the United States, but the whole world. You don't have that attitude with a lot of young people right now. And stuff like this Disney crap, you say parents think that Disney's teaching their kids, showing their kids something good. More and more parents, Tim, are waking up to the fact that Disney does not have the best interests of their kids at heart. I can promise you. You can look at the stats on how many people are visiting Disney right now. It is plummeting because people realize, hang on, these people are trying to brainwash my kids. These people are trying to teach my kids instead of me teaching my kids. Now, I don't know who in here has kids. Maybe I'm the only one. But nothing, we talked about this last time I was with you, nothing will bring out the vicious teeth of a mom or a dad more, whether they're a left-leaning parent, center, or right-leaning parent. Nothing brings their teeth out faster than thinking some stranger is taking their autonomy and authority away from their own household. That is when the fists come up. And so Disney's just doing it on a multi-billion-dollar level. But again, it's like the Grammys. It's so blatant now. We used to accuse them of, what they're really trying to do, right? And they'd say, oh, go put your tinfoil hat back on. They're not doing that. Well, we don't have to accuse them of it anymore because it's right in front of our faces, and parents are waking up to it. So good. I'm glad Disney is doing that. It's just another strike against them as far as I'm concerned.
One of the most frustrating things about the whole woke ideology is, one, look, if you want to make an argument about slaves building the country and reparations, we can have the conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to be rooted in critical race theory and stuff, but the critical race theory stuff is resulting in segregation, racial animosity. And there's been numerous polls. I think Gallup ran a poll that said people view racial tensions in this country worse now, after the Obama presidency than before. Like, following his presidency, all we got from the left was race, 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 race. And this is, I'm growing up in a world where they're passing laws and there's court rulings to end discrimination based on race. And you end up now with this. The U.S. has still not atoned for slavery, which is just generating, in my opinion, more racial animosity. That, I'll put it this way. When I said that I think this country more than atoned, how many people died in the Civil War? Like 1.8 million or something like that. Yeah. Now, granted, there's a lot of Confederates there, but let me just point out the Confederacy doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. And so after the states that wanted slavery were crushed in one of the most bloody military conflicts ever, I'd have to argue that the North militaristically crushing the South was, and then all of the Northerners who opposed slavery, and it wasn't completely about slavery, mind you, I understand that. But the end of slavery brought about through the Civil War, I think, it counts as atonement on the part of the North at the very least, and the South no longer exists. After the South was defeated, they were occupied by Northern forces in the Reconstruction era, which didn't end until there was almost another Civil War. So when they come out and they're like, this country still hasn't atoned, I'm like, I don't know, I kind of think like 500,000 to 800,000 dead soldiers fighting to end the expansion of slavery at the very least, which resulted in the end of slavery, sounds like atonement to me. And then also keep in mind that much of the country's expansion and development happened after this. In fact, one of the key components of the Civil War was that Abraham Lincoln was saying, I could be getting this wrong. It's been a while since I read about it. And there's people who know more than me, obviously, academics. But what was really happening was the current state of politics was to stop the expansion of slavery into new territories as they became states. Mm-hmm. So California, for instance, was never a slave state. It entered as a free state, was always a free state. And so it was ending the expansion. Slavery was being suppressed, essentially. Mm-hmm. So they want to argue it was never atoned for, but I'm like, man, not only was the political environment to shut it down slowly over time with massive resistance, those who tried to keep it were crushed with military force. And you want to talk about atonement? How about Sherman's March to the Sea and the decimation of family homes and cities and villages, or the ransacking and burning of Richmond? This kind of stuff pisses me off because it's a bunch of ideological blowhards. And they put out these videos. I watched one where this woman's like, we should abolish private property. Also, I'm moving into my own house. It is psychotic lunacy that's going to result in my opinion, all of these good things that we've retained while getting rid of the bad will be destroyed, will be wiped out, and then we'll all be left holding empty bags in the middle of the woods, fending for ourselves.
Yeah, I was going to say, this show, The Proud Family, aired in the early 2000s, so I remember watching it as a kid, and I'm kind of sad to see them injecting this very obviously pointed ideology into it, because it was one of the first TV shows I remember seeing. I think it is the first time I remember seeing Muslim characters depicted on television.
Yeah, true.
There's like a whole episode where she, like the Penny, the main character, does kind of like an exchange, but it's within her own school district with a Muslim family, and she has to wear a hijab and talk about it and whatever else. And like, there are ways to talk about culture and ways to talk about the challenges different people face coming into America without it being like, let's all blame one person and let's have it be about how this country is bad. You know, this show is actually interesting, and this is the reboot. I wish they would have stuck with what they were trying to do in the early 2000s.
Like inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a big part of the critical race theory, is the inclusion of it. So why exclude? Why talk about evil and them and those if you really want to include people in the process? And I will also say, this country was born on the backs of British subjects that had to fight a war to overthrow their slave master, King George. The whole thing, all of us, come from slaves.
Can you name another country that fought a civil war over slavery in large part? Name any other nation in the history of the planet. They've all had slaves. Every empire had slaves. Yeah. Is there any other one that fought a civil war to end it?
Not that I can think of.
I'm going to look up.
I think it's just us.
Yeah. I think it is.
I'm going to start searching because maybe there is. I don't know one off the top of my head.
They come after these kids young. The CRT stuff that even landed in a little too close to home a few years ago, and I read it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking about there's my son sitting next to his best friend who he plays baseball with, who's black. My son's a white kid, and they're both reading the same thing. And it's saying, if you're this color, then this is what you're about. And if you're that color, you don't have a chance. And both these kids are looking at each other going, my son felt like he needed to apologize. Mm-hmm. He's like, man, I didn't know, they're little kids. And the other kid felt terrible because he's like, what do you mean I don't have a chance? We both hit home runs last weekend.
It's all negativity.
Oh, it's terrible. It is
children.
Mind torture.
Right.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Well, and this is his best friend, right? Are they going to spend the rest of the time they go to school together being like, oh wait, there's actually something terrible about us being friends?
They would if they didn't have parents that told them, hey, that's nonsense.
That's true, and a lot of kids don't have parents like
and
that.
And you're right, a lot of them don't. Yep.
I'm trying to follow up on this. It looks like maybe Brazil fought a revolution to overthrow slavery. It was this Emperor Pedro. I'm getting this all wrong. I need more data. It's like sign up to look at Quora. I don't want to sign up, guys.
Well, in the UK, they abolished slavery, I think, a couple decades before the United States did. So the argument from a lot of these people is that if the U.S. never had independence and it was just a colony of the UK, slavery would have ended a lot sooner. I kind of don't think so. I think the Civil War would have just been the Southern Revolution. I mean, that's basically what it was. The Confederacy was trying to secede from the Union, make their own country. And if the UK was doing the same thing, I'd imagine they would have done the exact same thing. The only difference is they'd be fighting against the crown. I don't know what the strength of the crown is at that point. It'd be a really interesting history to see like the War of 1812 actually ends up as some kind of conflict over slavery, or probably not, because I think it was like 1830 or whatever the UK finally abolished it or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, man. Long story short, I think the people who write this stuff, they just have no idea what they're talking about. Yeah. And that's a lot of what guides culture for humans. And man, I don't know, it's kind of depressing, right? So, Bill Maher did this really great segment, I guess, last week, talking about how culture revolutionaries want to erase human nature, and you can't. Mao wanted to get rid of the 4 great olds or whatever, old culture and stuff like that, and you can't do it. And then he says in the Soviet Union, they had this idea of like the strong Soviet man who cared more about being part of a collective than of individualism. And then Bill Maher makes the joke that when in reality, the Soviet man just wanted to wear a tracksuit, be on a yacht with a beautiful woman, and then he shows a guy in a tracksuit or whatever. But the reason I bring up Bill Maher is that, he's very much in line with a lot of this stuff too. Notably, his Prager interview. Not interview, but the conversation when he was on the panel. And Prager said they're putting tampons in the men's room, and Bill Maher laughed at him. Like, Bill Maher may be doing better than a lot of these mainstream default liberal types when it comes to when it comes to understanding some of the news and what's happening in our culture. But even he's behind. And so you end up with Bill Maher, who's supposed to represent like a higher class of political commentary, It's smarter than Jon Stewart, but still funny, things like that. And even they don't have any idea what they're talking about. They're not reading current news. They're not talking about current cultural issues. They're behind the curve by a couple of years. So I don't know, man. Part of me is not particularly hopeful, to be completely honest.
If everything is racist, then nothing is racist.
Yeah, true.
And so the best way to keep people fired up about racism, because I believe that people that push crap like this, they want to see racism. They need to see racism. Mm-hmm. They need that hatred to exist so they have a reason to go out and make the money that they make doing whatever it is, the angle that they're pushing. And so, the best way to do that is anybody that I disagree with, I'm going to call them a racist.
Yeah.
And then the other person goes, we weren't even talking about that. What do you mean I'm a racist? They go, no, you're a racist. You just don't know it. That's part of the CRT thing is you don't even know that you're a racist, but you are. Trust me.
It's like vaccines and Pfizer, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need another one. Now you need a booster. Now you need another thing. Like if you solved racism, who would fund all these nonprofits, right? Like,
Dude,
exactly
it
right.
happened to me in 2016. Best friend in LA. We were talk politics every day, pretty much. Well, we would watch Rachel Maddow, and he'd have CNN on the background. I was talking about Hillary Clinton's emails and her servers, and like, oh my gosh, look at what she did with Sidney Blumenthal with Osprey Global Solutions in Libya to gun run for. It's basically privateering. He's getting Sidney Blumenthal all this money, and he's like, you're white privilege. You've got white privilege. Like it just came down to you've got white privilege, and it was the first time I'd ever been told that in my life, and I was like, what the hell is going on? I'm talking about Hillary's emails, dude. Look at the data. And he's like, you're just racist. Your white privilege is coming out. And it was shocking. Blown, powerless. I didn't know how to respond. No wasn't enough. No, I'm not isn't enough. If they keep saying it over and over, and I just had to disengage. I left. I haven't talked to the guy hardly at all.
It's really one of the worst things you can call somebody. What's worse than being called a racist?
Well, there's a lot of worse things.
I don't know. I mean, that's like if you were
a lot.
actually a racist, like a real racist, that's one of the nastiest humans around. If you're an actual racist, I mean, I've run into a couple of them, and you're like, wow, I don't want, You know, I mean, they're really nasty people. From all sectors of the world that are true racists. Right. So when you're called one and you're not one, and that word gets thrown around so flippantly, at this point it almost has lost its sting, because everything, like I said, if everything's racist, then nothing is racist.
Most countries in the world are extremely racist. The United States, in my opinion, is the least racist place I've ever been.
Totally.
I think Sweden may have been one of the most racist places I've ever been. You know, and they masquerade as opposing racism, but then they're like super racist.
But it's, I mean, they can think that they're not racist because they have homogenous society, right? Like this argument gets made about Japan all the time. They're very strict on immigration. You cannot live in Japan.
But Sweden's issue is that they kind of don't. They have pockets of racial minorities from other parts of the world that they've boxed in, claim they're not racist, and then segregate these people from their own society and refuse to hire them while acting like they're all progressive. That's what I mean. Like, at least in Japan, they're honest about them being like, our country is Japan for the Japanese, so you can't come here. Sweden's like, oh, we love and care about everybody. You know, they're allowed to come here. Everybody in the box. And then I heard this from a lot of people, even Americans. I heard an American woman who moved to Sweden saying that they wouldn't hire her because she had an accent. She spoke Swedish, but had an accent. And they were like, nope.
There's like no integration.
Did you get that too? Traveling around? You've been around. How many countries have you lived in, Serge?
I have no idea. Probably like 10 or so.
You were nodding when Tim was saying United States is the least racist?
Yeah, by far. And people just don't realize that because they've rarely been other places. So they often talk from an American perspective about these things and think that, people in, for instance, China, they're extremely racist if they're Han Chinese against even other Chinese like people within China.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.